Good, thank you very much, and good evening to you all. We have talked a lot in the last few days, and I'm not going to talk a great deal more. We've talked about legal in religion, we've talked about history in religion, philosophy in religion, sociology religion, and now I'm going to talk about talking. What do I mean? I mean dialogue, interfaith dialogue. And, you know, we've seen, I think, that legal holds the line where it does, sometimes it doesn't. Legal can be incredibly slow, but it sets out basic principles. But it doesn't solve everything by any means. And so I just wanted to lay down a few basic principles to do with dialogue. And in spite of all the barriers and problems and stops that come along with it, it's very simple. And first of these is that communication is basically always possible, and communication can resolve things. And the second assumption, if you're going to enter into dialogue, is that people, on the whole, are willing to communicate and there's only a relatively small number of people who will not communicate. Now, I'm not really addressing the people here in this hall. You're all here, you're willing to communicate, you want to exchange ideas, you want to listen. So I'm really talking about a broader way of approaching interfaith dialogue, which applies especially to both minority and majority religious groups. You know, communication, it's essential to your life. It's essential to all our lives. You know, you have to communicate with others to live. And through communication, you will gain a greater liking for others, a greater reality on what or why they do what they do, and a greater understanding about them. And these same basic principles apply to religions. Whatever it is between religions, whether it is between religions, whether it is within a religion, whether it is between a religion or religions and governments, dialogue is vital. And it doesn't mean that you have to compromise on your religious beliefs, but it means that you do have to accommodate others' beliefs. So I think sometimes religions are concerned about having to compromise their beliefs, but I don't believe that is what dialogue is about. It's about accommodating your beliefs with others. Now, I'm coming from, I didn't say this, but I'm coming from a group called the All Faiths Network, which is based in the UK. The All Faiths Network is part of a network of interfaith groups, which is called the Interfaith Network. And the Interfaith Network has government funding. And I won't say it's recognized by the government, but it at least is some kind of interface. I'll come back to that in a bit. And I was going to go into problems, issues, barriers to communication, but due to the time, I'm only going to address something that I think is perhaps the most insidious aspect of dialogue and interfaith dialogue, and that is pretended, false, or no dialogue. And what do I mean by that? Well, for a start, someone said yesterday that human rights is for minorities. It's there to protect the minorities. I think you could say the same, that dialogue is also there to protect the minorities. A majority religion in a country doesn't need to dialogue because it's already in power, but it should. So what I want to explore a bit is the problems of when you have a false dialogue. And I'll give you first an example, a French example. At the time, we've heard about the Abu Picard law. And at the time this was being discussed, whenever it was, 15, 20 years ago now, the government assured, was in dialogue with the majority religions in the country and assured them that it would not affect them, it would not be a problem, it was only for the dangerous sects, and they would be okay. However, now we are, 20 years later, and what do we have in France? We have a situation where the major religions on the whole at that time did little to speak out about the potential discrimination against religious minorities. And now we see that Christians cannot wear crosses with their teachers or public servants. You cannot have an expression of your religious faith as a public servant. Children who wear turbans cannot go in schools. Full face coverings are not allowed. There's a whole range that I would say is an erosion of religious rights in France. And if we leave that or allow that to continue, where will we be in another 20 years, is the question I would ask. So, if the religions, or the major religions, did not speak out then, we come to the Pastor Niemöller quote that has often been stated, or several times been stated, the one, I did not speak out and then they came for me. So that is just an example of what I would have said is false dialogue or false assurance between government and religion. And in this case, it's the responsibility of the major religions in France who did not do enough to stop the erosion of rights in the country. I'll give you another example about in the UK. I'm part of what is called the Interfaith Network. Well, 5 years ago, this Interfaith Network, religions, any religion could join it, but only 8 major traditional religions could be on the board of the Interfaith Council. That was discriminatory, particularly as the Interfaith Network as a group was receiving government funding. Dialogue was going on, pointing this out to the board of the Interfaith Network, and it wasn't working. So what happened? What did we do at that point? Well, actually, we organized the conference where a legal expertise was brought about that showed that the fact that the Interfaith Network was receiving government money and then discriminating on which religions could actually be managers of the organization was discriminatory. And so it brought about a change in the statutes of the organization before it was necessary to enter into any kind of further legal activity. So, and then perhaps a final example is that, perhaps a final example is that it's it is very difficult for minority religions to enter into dialogue with majority religions. And so we have a problem of dialogue between religions. To get an engaging conversation going with, for example, in the UK Church of England priests or Russian Orthodox priests by minorities is a very difficult thing to do. So we have this ingrained discrimination within religions too. So what can we do about this is really the question. Really what I'm trying to say is this is a problem. It's a problem within religions. It's a problem between governments. Yet we have to persist and we have to communicate in a range of different ways and try to resolve that. So what does dialogue mean? What does it mean? Well, on a kind of grassroots, I mean, we've already seen examples of this, but on a grassroots level, it means opening up to your neighbors. Go to their service, or maybe not even that. Go to their events, visit them, communicate, talk. This is often something that is not done, but should be done in order to develop the communication. And I would say that it is a vitally missing part of interfaith work between many religions. Now, what is it that we can do with regards to our communications? And I think here that we also need to understand that our communications, when I say our communications, I especially mean those minority religions that are having a hard time. They need to understand more about communication. And on the other side, majority religions need to be open and accepting of dialogue from those religions that they either consider false, not religions, or whatever they may consider. But what I'm really calling for, and what I would say, and again, not to you, but to religious groups that are having difficulties, is that you need to be clear and precise in your communications. You need to be friendly. You need to lay out your case with relevance. And if that is not done adequately, it creates barriers to communications and with interfaith dialogue. And it is also the responsibility of those religions that are the majority religions to speak out for the others and to engage, as we are doing in this conference, that many do in many other conferences. But again, it is part of, shall we say, our community here the responsibility is to pull in those people who are resistant to dialogue, who are not willing to dialogue, and to find ways which may be clever, or it may be necessary to be somewhat forceful. I don't mean violent, but I mean forceful in one's communications, to get them round a table. And so I've seen this to be successful. I've seen it to be successful where people have had an extremely negative reaction to a particular religion, and then when you go in and you explain it and you enter into dialogue, then it resolves the problem and it opens the door for further ground to be built upon. So all I'm calling for here is for this community to be aware of it. I'm sure it is already aware of it, but it will help to bring in those aspects, those who have contacts with major religions in other countries, to bring them in to this kind of a conference, or to help set up other kinds of dialogue. Because the bottom line of it all is that if you do not communicate, you will not get a solution. And so the only way to communicate is to communicate precisely, clearly, with relevance and with friendliness towards others. And that's all. Thank you very much.